think a lot of people secretly believes discipline should remove fear. And that's why they keep failing at it. Not because they weak, not because they lazy, They just thought discipline was supposed to feel emotionally stabilizing. And it's not, right? If anything, the real discipline usually feels psychologically suspicious for a long time. Your brain genuinely starts questioning your intention. You wake up 3 days in a row and suddenly your own mind is talking to you like, all right, man. What's this little productivity cosplay that's going on? That's real though, because people think discipline creates certainty. But most of the time, discipline actually creates exposure first. That's different. It exposes how inconsistent your emotions are, how dependent you are on momentum, how much of your identity was built around potential instead of just repetition. That's why people romanticize motivation so much. Motivation protects your self image, disciplines threatens it, right? Huge difference, right? Motivation lets you imagine yourself becoming somebody. Discipline forces you to confront that gap between imagination and behavior. And bro, that gap gets disrespectful, especially creatively, because creativity already attracts people with unstable relationships to identity. I'm convinced of this. Like, no mentally balanced person decides, you know what? I'm going to spend the next 6 years of my life making symbolic drawings in a room, hoping strangers emotionally understand me. Right? And creative people especially love certainty disguised as systems. That's why people become obsessed with routines before they build any actual consistency. The routine feels emotionally protective. It feels intelligent, right? It feels structured, controlled. Meanwhile, bro made the perfect Notion template and still hasn't written a single page, right? Brother, your productivity system got lower now. Like, what we doing? And I'm not even roasting like that because I understand the impulse. Like, modern life makes uncertainty feels pathological, right? Like, if you don't know exactly who you are, or where you're going or what your niche is or what's your purpose by the age of 26, people start looking at you like expired fruit, expired milk. That's why everybody online talks like a startup company now, right? Talking about I'm building, I'm scaling, I got a new chapter, soft launch, right? Like, brother, you just bought a lamp. What are you talking about? Like, relax. But seriously, like, I think people underestimate how much internet culture trained everybody to expect emotional immediacy. Everything responds instantly now, things like text messages, algorithms, entertainment, validation. You can post a picture and know within 30 seconds whether strangers approve of your existence that day. No wonder people struggle with long term repetition, right? Long term repetition is emotionally silent. You go to the gym for 3 months and still feel insecure. You draw for 2 years and still compare yourself to everybody else. You upload videos and still feel invisible, right? We only gain what, 20 views right now, even single digits. Like, I understand this, right? But that's the part nobody emotionally prepares for because people think discipline should produce confidence immediately. And honestly, sometimes discipline produces humiliation first, like genuinely, right? You ever watch old videos of somebody before they became great at something? It almost feels illegal, right? You watching somebody publicly become themselves in real time, They start with awkward cadences, bad editing, random opinions, unstable confidence, right? That's uncomfortable to watch because it reminds people growth is still visible. And modern culture hates visible growth for some reason, right? People want to emerge fully formed now. That's why everybody obsessed over aesthetics before substance, cinematic lighting, personal branding, creative director. Like, brother, your last three projects are still unfinished, right? Hard drive is still full with drafts and Unfinished projects, man. That's tough. Right? And anime and manga actually understands its dynamic way better than self-improvement culture does, right? In my opinion. Of course, because self-improvement culture still frames discipline like this clean masculine transformation. Like what's going on? Like they doing things like cold showers, doing studying this fake stoicism, Sigma music, I don't know. Like dudes staring at a mountain aggressively for no reason. Meanwhile, psychologically, realistic characters usually look way messier than that, honestly. Like Thorfinn, not because he's disciplined in some motivational way, but because he slowly realizes there's no emotional shortcut around becoming a different person. That's harder. People always want transformation to feel dramatic, but realistic transformation usually just feels repetitive and slightly embarrassing. You repeat better behaviors while still emotionally feeling like the old version of yourself. That disconnect is horrifying, and I think that's why so many people quit halfway through changing because internally they still feel fake. They think if this was real growth, wouldn't I feel more certain? Right? And that's not necessarily true, right? Because sometimes growth just feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliarity gets interpreted as wrongness now, especially online, because online everybody is always performing certainty constantly, right? Nobody just says, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm trying. Right? Yeah, nobody says that. No. Right? Everybody is a prophet now. Everybody got frameworks, everybody got philosophies, everybody is speaking on things. Everybody thinks their opinions are facts. Dude discovered a new poet yesterday, and now he's talking like a disappointed war general, right? Like, get well soon, bro. Like, what you doing? And certainty performs well socially too, and that's the dangerous part. Confident people gets rewarded even when they're wrong, right? Especially online. They get attention, they get money, that moolah. Uncertainty doesn't algorithmically perform well, right? Reflection doesn't clip up as hard as conviction. That's why the loudest people often sound the most emotionally certain, right? Even when internally they're clearly collapsing. It gets spooky out here, right? And honestly, I think some people avoid discipline because discipline removes excuses eventually. That's the real fear because as long as you're inconsistent, you can still fantasize. You can still blame circumstances. You can still blame timing. You can still blame energy. You can still blame mental state. You can still blame potential, right? But once you become consistent, eventually you got to confront your actual level. That's horrifying creatively, especially for gifted people, because gifted people survive off imagined ceilings for years. All right, look at Ben Simmons. All right. Aomi from Kuroko felt real for that exact reason, though. Not because he was talented, right? Because eventually talent isolated him from effort emotionally. Once effort becomes emotionally foreign, discipline starts feeling humiliating. Practice feels insulting. Like, wait, I gotta try now? Like, what's going on? All right. And some people genuinely never recover from that realization. That's why early praise is dangerous sometimes. People build identities around being naturally exceptional instead of being resilient. That one failure rearranges their whole personality, and that's nasty. And honestly, I think disciplined people are usually just people who survive disappointment long enough to stop negotiating with reality. That's it. They're not superhumans. They're not productivity monks. They're not alpha male podcasting from dimly lit warehouses. And they're just people who accepted uncertainty wasn't leaving, right? So they moved anyway, quietly, but, without needing emotional permission every day. And that's the real thing people actually want, not discipline, you know, permission to begin without certainty. Because deep down, Most people think confidence is supposed to arrive before action, when usually confidence is just evidence collected after repetition, not before.